It's great to be here in Rome with you all to tell you a bit about the work that we're doing at OONI. I figured, I'd learned about the MAT, the Measurement, Analysis, and Tools Working Group of RIPE when I met in Montreal, Stephen, and it seemed like an excellent opportunity to come here and tell you a bit about our own MAT, the Measurement Aggregation Toolkit. So I don't know. Maybe I only find this funny, but I thought it would have been a nice joke. So, anyways, I will tell you what we are going to talk about today, and the main topic is the area of work that we focus on as OONI, the Open Observatory of Network Interference. And what we do is we measure internet censorship. So before going deeper into that, it's maybe useful to clarify what we mean by internet censorship. So when we talk about internet censorship, what we're talking about is the intentional control or suppression of what can be accessed, published, or viewed on the internet, right? So a key part of this is intentional, right? And why this is challenging is that oftentimes, I guess many people, even in the MAT working group, face it when doing network measurement. You deal with certain things that you observe as somebody carrying out internet measurements, and you don't necessarily know what is causing that behavior. So, for example, we deal a lot with this level of uncertainty where you see some signal that could be attributable to internet censorship, but it might also be attributable to some sort of transient network failure, some sort of error condition that's happening on the network and is not due to an intentional restriction. But before we go deeper into that, I think it's important to also say why we measure internet censorship. Why is this important? And I think it's important for a variety of different reasons. For starters, it's really important because the work that we do at OONI, it's in support of a lot of advocacy efforts aimed at fighting internet censorship. So we see ourselves as a provider of data to support evidence for these types of fights. We also believe it's important to offer a public archive of longitudinal open data on internet censorship worldwide so that we can study this phenomenon over a long period of time and understand how it has evolved. It's also really important to have oversight and transparency so that those implementing internet censorship are accountable and that we know what is blocked and how it is being blocked. We also support a lot of research interventions that study internet censorship from a technical perspective, but also efforts aimed at making the internet more resilient to forms of censorship. So we support a lot of internet like censorship circumvention tool developers in making their tools more robust against the evolving forms of internet censorship. So this is why it's important. But what is the real impact of censorship? When does censorship happen? I won't go too much deep into all of these, but just to give you an idea of when censorship happens, like what are the triggers for it. And so I think broadly speaking, censorship tends to happen when there are there's a baseline of censorship that is implemented basically everywhere around the world. But then we also see an increase in censorship around certain political and social events, whether that is elections. So we have seen, over the years, social media getting blocked during elections in many countries around the world. We see it during political transitions. When there was the coup in Myanmar, they started blocking WhatsApp. There were internet blackouts affecting the country. We see it during conflicts. So, when there was an increase in tension between Azerbaijan and Armenia, they started to block TikTok. We saw it obviously in the escalation of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But it's also very importantly targeting marginalized communities. So we see a lot of groups, whether for certain ideologies or beliefs, religions, or just attributes of their being, getting impacted by the restriction in accessing certain types of content on the internet. And lastly, we see it around protests. So like, one case that I will now dive a little bit deeper into is, when in Iran last year, there was a wave of protests following the Mahsa Amini protests. We saw a significant intensification of the forms of censorship being deployed inside of the country. And so around that time, we worked on a multi-stakeholder report investigating the various forms of internet censorship that followed the Mahsa Amini protests in Iran. This was a joint project between OONI, IOTA, Measurement Lab, Cloudflare, Cantic, ISOC, and Article 19. It was facilitated by the European Commission and the United States government. And basically what we did is we took all of these different data sets and we used them to be able to study how internet censorship had escalated basically in the country following the protests. And I just wanted to pick out a few bits of information that I think are particularly interesting and relevant to this type of audience. But you can obviously find the full report on our site. So in terms of the timeline of events, as probably Mahsa Amini was murdered on 16th of September 2022, and this triggered sort of not unprecedented, but a significant wave of protests in the country. Right, protests emerged in many different regions, and following this, this enormous wave of social uprising and protests, the government started cracking down on the protesters, and obviously in the physical space, but also on the internet. And so we saw a significant increase in the forms of restriction to access to the internet. Specifically, one thing that we saw that we had not previously seen was the use of digital curfews, is how we were calling them, which is something that we had also seen before in Myanmar, but in Iran it was sort of the first time that we saw this type of technique being used, where basically for specific hours during the day, the internet was completely disconnected, so there was no access. And this was limited either to specific regions or in some cases it was nationwide, and access to the global internet was restricted for several hours. And this was done over the course of 13 consecutive days. And here we can see the presence of this curfew in the IOTA data, for example, which monitors internet blackouts. Another thing we started to see was that several social media platforms that previously were accessible started to be blocked. Similarly, app stores started to get blocked as well, probably as a result of people trying to use circumvention tools to get around the restrictions. And so, they were basically cracking down on different ways that people would use to gain unrestricted access. Similarly, browser extension repositories started to be blocked. And then a few things that I think are especially interesting maybe to you is that encrypted DNS, which previously was mostly working in Iran, started to be restricted much more heavily. So we saw all of the main encrypted DNS providers being blocked. And this was, as you can see from these charts, previously they were somewhat working, some of them. And then, from around, this is October, end of September, October, they started to get entirely blocked. Other interesting things that we saw was that HTTP3 and QUIC were blocked only on certain networks, but it was like the whole protocol was entirely restricted. We do not know why QUIC and HTTP3 was specifically targeted. We speculated that it might be as a result of their censorship capabilities not being sophisticated enough to implement restrictions on these newer protocols. On some networks, we also saw a complete block of IPv6. So, there was a presentation before, like talking about adoption of IPv6. In some places, it is blocked. Like they decided to entirely block it. And so, this is stuff that I guess has an impact on, the rollout of new technologies that are, more secure and in some cases an improvement. But if they do not work, then that is quite unfortunate. So this is an example of the research that we do, but we really see ourselves as an enabler to conducting this type of research independently. So OONI was a project started back in 2011, 2012, and our goal is basically to empower decentralized efforts at understanding network interference worldwide. So we really would like to enable people to use our data, use our tools to do this type of research on their own. And so as a result of this, we have this open data set that counts billions of network measurements from basically every country in the world. And it's just out there for anybody to use. And the data set is collected through our app called OONI Probe, which is a mobile app that you can install on basically every device, like mobile or desktop. But we also have a MAT. So the MAT is the Measurement Aggregation Toolkit, which is this open data platform that you can use to explore this giant data set, which is OONI, so that you can come up with your own inquiries of what kinds of network interference you might be interested in exploring. And one of the things that I thought is like a reflection to make for this audience is that there's kind of this challenge in presenting rich technical information to non-technical audiences, which is the audiences that we are mostly dealing with, in that, as I was saying before, there's this margin of uncertainty where you have some number of data points that contribute towards confirming or refuting a certain hypothesis, but ultimately there's always some sort of margin of uncertainty. And sometimes the margin is not, it's pretty clear. Sometimes the signal you see in the data is very obvious. Like in this case, when they started blocking WhatsApp in Senegal, you can clearly see that before it's all green, and then at some point for a brief period of time, it's all yellow, and then it starts being green again. But other times it's not so clear, So like this is from today in Italy, RT.com in Italy. So as you know, Russian news media is blocked in all of Europe, but not entirely blocked. Some networks do not block it, others do. And so, what you can do is you can maybe break it down by network, and you can drill down and see, okay, can we remove the noise and try and look deeper? And sometimes that is possible, other times it is not. And so this is an example where we were looking at the blocking of these RFERL sites during the Kazakh elections. And the signal was not really clear. So we had to take steps in order to analyze it further. And basically, as part of this, we were able to confirm, basically, that in this case, it was not a complete block, but it was a form of throttling. So what we did here was that we were looking at the timing information related to TLS handshakes. And what we noticed is that we used as a baseline a site that was hosted on the same provider as the sites that we suspected to be throttled. And then, sort of drew that baseline and said, okay, we expect the time to perform a TLS handshake to be this. But then, we see in the data points for this specific news site to be significantly higher than what is our baseline. And so through this we were able to effectively provide pretty strong evidence that it was intentionally being restricted, because there would not be any other reason why you would see such high TLS handshake times for only this specific site and not another one that would have the same network path. But yeah, this is only the starting point. I invite you to check out all the resources we have on our websites and get involved in our community. We have a public Slack channel, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.